Hello. Very important. Be yourselves. Easy to say. As a teacher, I take it at heart. Give the guidelines, but let the student tell the story through the piece. It's a very important thing I would like to share with you because I find that very often either the student tries to please, if can, should or could. Not too much philosophy, but in a way, it is a definition of the choice. Why do I do it, and what does it mean to me, and how can I be believable beyond and above of playing the right notes versus the wrong notes, as the only dictatorship of the wrong note, which overwhelms us naturally to play precise, to play clean, to play astute and organized, and always not using more weight than necessary, not trying to force the sound or not trying to readjust on the spot. If you find that the sound produced by the instrument and the acoustic on the spot doesn't correspond at all to what you dreamt when you thought of the piece, or prepared, practiced and repeated it countless times, then deal with the unexpected. Fine. Deal with the moment and the ephemeral situation. Fine. But because the end of the performance in a concert ends with at best applause, but the end of a hearing, jury, audition, exam ends with a judgment, and the judges are empowered to choose either objectively because of what they heard that corresponds to a value by itself, and they say, I wouldn't play it this way, but this is valuable playing, I accept this. Some consider that there's only one way, the right way being their way. And if somehow it doesn't match it in the details of the choices, which are not indicated in the score, which are these little customizations of the score, the so-called rubato, which nobody really defines clearly, or the quantity of it, or the perception of it, versus the indications of it, or the structural composition itself, that somehow rhythmically, through a hemiola, a suspension, or a appoggiatura, creates that sense of delay or anticipation according to be before, after the beat, or around the beat. So you could consider that just playing it rhythmically right by itself creates the sense of the rubato that the music expresses. And because we know, for instance, in Chopin, and we assume that we know that he was very much into bel canto and therefore imitating on the piano the singing of the lyrical bel canto style with a lot of freedom for the singer and cadential situations and decorative patterns, and therefore the orchestra usually waits for the singer to finish all the vocalises and then merge together into the cadence for the next section or the ending of the piece. But all these things are true, but that doesn't mean that we can convince a group of judges that our choice as interpretation for the text understood, analyzed, or intuitively purely played as the flow of the events happen, because that's how we are. We play with our conviction, but also with our sensitivity. And of course, you have the shaping from the teacher, perhaps the shaping from the comparative recordings that you hear available more than ever now on every YouTube possibility. So inevitably, the decision lies ultimately in a way the young student who you teach will at some point filter all these information, influences, enticing situations, or perhaps intimidated situations where they feel like if somebody tells them you don't do enough or something you thought you did too much, perhaps their perception of projection wasn't what they received, or the filter of their taste, which defines objectively the taste, perhaps is not as universal, but you feel it is because they're famous and you wish to be one, at least to be perhaps successful enough to become one. And there, once you are, then your opinion matters in your interpretation rather than you hoping to have their acquiescence or rejection of you. Then in a way, a candidate hands a rope saying, if you don't like me, hang me. And in a way, it's of course drastically and purposefully sarcastic what I just said, and naturally it's a caricature of the psychology of all this situation where you play and you're eliminated, or you pass, or you enter in another degree, or you win another prize which allows you to play another amount of concerts, or you earn the right to record. And it's always about earning or losing, and then it's a filter because so many are called and so few are chosen, and the criterias are of course subjective. So teaching, one gets attached to a student, then it's less objective. But then a teacher who hears a student of another teacher, or a judge member of a jury in international or national competition hearing a student of another obviously teacher from another school or even country, or regardless, is called to judge through the filter of their own taste. And nobody asks the jury members to define what will be their criteria before, because that's the essence of art, is something in the eye of the beholder or the hearer in this way. And that's why I see it so important for the teacher, because I feel I'm the hyphen between the jury and the student, not to mention the composer's aura of the piece which is played by. And I want to guide the student. I test, I sense, I feel, I hear the student searching, the student finding, possibly the student going in the wrong direction if I consider it is. So it's my respect to the student to implement my taste and saying this is the right taste, because if you do something so drastic as you do, even if you're intuitively convinced, you will shock more jury members than you'll convince, even if it's not your intent, or even if it's your intent. So between those who want to please as candidates and those who want to impress and impose, and then feel like somehow it's considered arrogant by the jury members, a jury member who hears his or her own student will be differently tuned to the expectation, and then if they hear somebody else, they'll be more harsh in their judgment, since they're there to judge. But when you teach, you're not there to judge only. Of course, you have to assess, evaluate rather than judge, but then bring to another level. And then you start explaining, you start defining, you start giving examples, you start explaining why your choice would be this. And what is the intent of the composer in your understanding compared to perhaps the student, and accept to be different, respect the student, or impose to the student your opinion because you respect the student as well. It's not just about accepting that anything goes just because there is a conviction. That's why it's so subtle, because we deal with subjectivity, not with objectivity. I'll give you an example. In this B section of the slow movement of the third sonata by Chopin, we have this very calm section with ostinato bass and 3 beats or 6 beats on the beats of a very calm, melodic, simple pattern. And then we have an accompaniment of the harmonic moving thirds under. So if Chopin wanted to be totally on the beats and very stable and very calming and very pastoral as it seems in the mood, he could have done, or now he chooses to play the first thirds before the beat, suspended, therefore held over a suspension, then two passing tones, anticipation, and this time instead of a suspended third, this time is repeated and creating the dissonance with the melody, the B, and this is an appoggiatura. The suspension is held, the appoggiatura is repeated. In one situation with the decaying instrument, you have a dissonance that is less harsh because it's overheld and is in the decay. And this is repeated in a mood which I would identify for the appoggiatura as tenderness, as a term of endearment and reassurance. Whenever here, with the leading tone, it's harsher, it's more about tension release, definition of the tonality, and here, the closing and the release of the tension. So in a way, I could say analytically to the student, beware not to do rubato, which would be to play unmeasured or free from the strict tempo, how much you get out of the rail of the track. Because already Chopin introduced in the accompaniment of these thirds emotion that is unsettled by the anticipation suspension and the redundant repeated appoggiatura from the anticipation before it. So you have a sense of motion inside that creates a sense of instability of the beats. If the rubato is to do something with the beats, then you have to have a structural system where you have beams that don't move because they support the edifice, imaginary structure like we do in imaginary, let's say, architectural internet. But of course, because sonata is a form, and therefore we play expression of thematic materials within a form, and the form prevails. We call it a sonata. So let's say that you decide to define differently the walls inside the structure, but the structural beams have to stay in order to support the whole. So you can decide to make a shorter space and a larger space rather than two evenly divided spaces, or the opposite. In other words, the internal division can be different in the writing of the values in the notation by the composer. It could be then, or, and I'm strictly in tempo here. But if I'm strictly in tempo and this is a suspension, and then this is release, this is repeated appoggiatura and release, and then I have an echo cell, as I call it, where he repeats exactly twice the same as term of endearment. Sorry, I love you, I love you, I love you. Then you can say in interpretation, I should find the rubato the second time immediately. Perhaps it's a regret, or some kind of imaginary psychological statement, since there are no lyrical lyrics to express. So let's say now that I am a musician with famous, let's say, bona fide, and everybody knows that I have a certain musical weight, and I don't do things just out of the whimsical moment. I can say Chopin rubato, slightly shaking the beats. It would be then on top of the rhythm of the Chopin's writing. So what I would have a little bit rushed forward in the drop of the thirds and have to overcompensate, intuitively or analytically defined, in the resolution, or the opposite. Relax and then straight. So why do I have to recoup what I overtook? What do I have to make up for what I changed or stole in time, or rubare, stolen in Italian, stolen time, doesn't mean always returned time. That's a little bit moralistic, but I don't want to enter in these philosophic ideas. I would just say that it's a question of, for me personally, about a way of balancing the pulse versus the melody in the expression. And if you feel like the music, as notated by Chopin, is not enough expressive, then you will enhance it, like as if you add some makeup on top of the beauty of the eye of the face, because you want to make it more dramatic gaze or less dramatic gaze, and then you can highlight it differently if you film it with obtaining some kind of effect of shadow and light with the lighting. So you can over dramatize an effect if you think, as a director of a movie or of a theater play, that you want to enhance the importance on a gaze more than another. Then it becomes very personal. You cannot say, our text is the original text, I'll play just the text, and once I play it right, the piece will exist by itself because it's a masterpiece. I don't have to recompose it. I don't have to help it be more expressive because it's expressive by itself. If not, why do I play it, since it comes already all written precisely, and all we do is try not to play a wrong note. In this case, why do we have to add a wrong feeling to it by enhancing some of the rhythmic stability or instability aspects of it? Either because of the tradition of the rubato that we consider necessary, and if so, how much? So you see, what I meant by saying is very important, and you notice in my passion expressing it, that is something that as a teacher, because I am one, besides the performer, which is on the side compared to the teacher, I don't try to think the one when I do the other. When I play with my intuition, regardless if it's filtered to my analysis of the piece or my hearing capacity of what I've accumulated as experience. Okay, that's me. But I'm not teaching a me to the others. I'm not trying to give them my fingerings purposely. I try to adjust to their physicality. Therefore, I hear their sensitivity and I try to say, perhaps it's too square. Try to play more rubato. Perhaps it's too much rubato. But how will it be perceived by other judges who will hear you for the audition, for the job, for the position, or for the competition, or for the career that you would like to have for this competition, or feel like you'll never have if you're out of the competition, even if you think somebody played less well but passed. And all this enters in a psychological soup of problems that you have to solve, going down back to the essence of who are you and why you're doing it and what it means to you, because you only will be believable when you do it as you're convinced. Of course, it's difficult to have a conviction when you're young because of all these information influences that are either you seek through a teacher or either you receive through the comparisons that you have to hear in order to make your opinion from other options than your teacher's opinion, but other performances. But ultimately, you cannot please everybody, and you shouldn't. Or you would, only if you're very convinced yourself. But any interpretational conviction is a choice, and who says choice says also choice of not doing something or doing more of something else. And you might change totally your mind about the way you play the piece, or you hear the piece, or you think of the piece through your life. But unfortunately, the students and the competitors in the competitions for piano until age 30 don't have this luxury of time, of revisitation of the piece through time, in order to accumulate a certain level of maceration of the musical elements, of understanding what is essential from what is superfluous, where the rubato is in a way too much, or you thought it wasn't enough when you were young yourself, regardless of others thinking of you or judging you. Is how you perceive yourself through time. You listen to some old recordings of yourself, in my case, and you can say, oh, I did too much, not enough. Why did I do that? I thought it was so meaningful. In fact, I should have gone to this, because the point of the line is the arrival point and not all the ways you circumambulate to go to the point. But that is something easy to say once you've been through. But when you're in it and you're seeking advice, I feel that as a teacher I have a big responsibility, because I'm hyphenating, as I said earlier, in my view of things, between the teachers, the students seeking and the judges judging. And I don't feel responsible because I feel like I play instead of the student. I don't go that far. I'm not having any psychological remote control on the student, thank God. And I never seek for that. I respect too much the student. And that's why I started speaking about, I think the important is to be yourself. How do you define it? I think is by deciding that the text is not all, but most. The teacher's opinion, if trusted, is not all. And it should be a combination between the two, filtered through your conviction, even if temporary conviction. And assume that when you play, you don't criticize yourself while playing as a young performer. Of course, the ideal performing parody would be you play for people who come to be told the story that you narrate to them through the words, sounds of the composer. The composer is an absentia. You are present. You vibrate to the piece. You try to translate all it means to you, and technically you manage some, less others. That's life. You try to have a better technique in order to play it better as you wish, to play it faster, lighter, more articulation, less pedal, more breathing, lighter decorations, heavier chords, not stretches, but perhaps anticipated preparations for the shifting so that you don't miss a bass or a line, or a secondary voices or a legato or something. All these bubbling elements of the cooking itself is the industry of playing, results in your playing. But the playing is received by an audience who is there to receive your storytelling, even if they know the piece, and preferably they don't. In that case is the ideal transmission. You play for them what is meaningful to you, and they love your conviction. And especially if they don't know the piece, then they accept it as this way. And if they know the piece, they could be themselves critical, as judges would be, but they're not judges. They might disagree, but they're there to be told a beautiful story. And I think they, as a group, even if different ways of perceiving the music from different channels, some like the melody more, the rhythm more, some think it's more important how the colors represent the pianist's palette of presenting the piece. Whichever aspect of the music of the piece or of the way of making music touches their heart, mind, and souls, and brings their enthusiasm, they're there to believe in what you tell them, to adhere, to connect, to be moved. During 25 minutes of the piece, they enter in another century, in another emotion, in another heroism, or a sense of tenderness or endearment of heroism. It's the romanticism of the 19th century in Europe, regardless if they read novels about it or if they know historically the stories of it, regardless even if they have no context of it. They just listen to it, and psychologically it talks to their soul through the tonal system, or even without the tonal system being aware for them, without solfege. You don't have to know the words to understand them. They understand the sound of the words, no more than the meaning, and they guess the meaning by the psychological intention that is embedded in the piece. Okay, but at the end of it, you play as a student or a candidate or a young competitor to be liked, perhaps, but beyond that, to be, if convincing, that's also true, but mostly to bring a compelling sense that they come to you because you want to bring them to the piece, and they come to the piece the way you like it. And nobody's there to judge if it's the right way to like it, regardless if it is or not, according to the specialists. And other specialists, they listen to you judgmentally, and the listeners listen to you emotionally, or willing to like you, or even if they're critical, they don't need to, they'd say they don't have to applaud, or if they do, they can applaud lightly, very little. They don't have to go like this. That perhaps it's a different level in the applause. They can give you standing ovation or not if they think that you touched something meaningful in their expectation of the artistic moment that they shared with you, regardless if again, stylistically, ethically almost, but at least aesthetically, put it this way, it corresponds to what it should be. It could be that it's totally tasteless in the eyes of some and totally very tasteful in the eyes of others, or ears, or psyches, mostly, because it's all about the psyche and the emotion and the way they perceive it. They can be impressed by your technique. They might not like or be touched by your playing, meaning the piece's essence rather than the piece's demonstration. But partly the virtuosity of the Romantic era for most piano works which were written for this instrument, at least in its infancy, even until today, would it be a Schumann, Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Brahms, Beethoven even, through the evolution of the instrument, you only have more of the crescendo, perhaps less, more of the forte, fortissimo than the mezzo forte, which perhaps it was expected with the action of the instrument and the gut strings with the leather hammer tips instead of the felt one with the triple steel strings. Okay, you project more, you can project less. Perhaps the effects are enhanced. The rubato in Chopin, the contrasts in Beethoven, the symphonic writing on the piano, the fortepiano, the very name of the instrument for its quality of expressive emotion through loudness and softness versus only the quality of articulation and spacing of the notes as it used to be for the harpsichord. But the criteria of beauty change with the instrument, therefore the music adapts to it and brings further. Then the instrument's bringing more energy to the sound than perhaps in comparison to the expectation of the composers of the time. We today play on these instruments things that appear to be probably exaggerated to their psyche or their expectations outside of the context of their time frame. After all, it's all about how we adjust to all this, and how we think that when we serve the music of the past on the pianos of today for the audiences of today, we become a little bit of what it is, a dedicated translator, possibly a narrator who narrates the story without exactly worrying about the very exact words. The pedaling of Beethoven on modern piano might sound overwhelming in blurriness, but in Beethoven's piano it was in order to avoid being over dry if the acoustics of the decay of the instrument were shorter, because they were. But to us, not to them. Not then. And perhaps if you ask them then, they'll say today people will play music of today. Therefore, if we play music of then on the music of the instruments of today, for the ears and the psyches of today, we are used to more emotional drive, to more dynamic range. The forte is there and the piano is there, and then before it was there. But okay, this is a question of attuning to the, of course, if we play on the original instruments, then we adjust to the original hearing, and then we can have an approach which brings us back in the context. Here we played outside of context, but we still have professionals who will judge us according to their opinion, regardless of the context, or even because of the context of the day. Saying today Chopin this, the way people played it before was not right, but with this instrument and this demands that is supposed to be this. I'm very cautious with this, because if I'm very analytical and I only say analytically, I don't need to do therefore by honesty, if that is a virtue in interpretation or translation, I don't know, that's a bit provocative to say. But by honesty I can say all I have to do is play strictly the tempo as indicated in the score. Chopin doesn't write rubato in words. Then Chopin already put everything in the notation of the rhythmic sections, so I don't have to add a rubato to the rhythm. I come to this conclusion because I think that if you can do a lot with less, and then with time or with influence, because you're hurt by somebody who tells you something, you go to ask him or her, what happened if I didn't pass this round of the competition? And usually, most likely, the common thing to say is a generality, because you're not the teacher to go in details with a student. It's a judge who would say to a candidate who didn't pass, and can say it was not enough musical, it wasn't fast enough, or he didn't have enough colors, he didn't express enough rubato, or okay, but all this remains in a generality. And then if you try to apply it to go forward and say, how will I integrate this comment to make it better, then you realize that it's not like a layer over a layer that will make it better. It might not fit with your articulation, your touch, your sound. How much voicing would shape the section more than only the rubato, but perhaps combined. If you bring the melody more, if you bring then in the thirds the top part or the bottom part, but under the melody, and then you could be told, but it's too much voice because now it's overshaped and I don't hear everything. Objectively, I should play, because then I hear all the parts. I don't carve them, shape them, highlight them, or therefore darken them in a certain light and shade, chiaroscuro. Now, I personally like the sculpting of the sounds, and not too much rubato with a little bit of pedal. But then sometimes when I was young, I liked as a performer in Chopin not too much rubato. Nowadays, with my age, I find myself swaying tiny little more or less in a certain way with the rubato. I imagine it is some shiver of wind on top of the trees' leaves, but the tree stays straight. So it's a little bit of rubato, but not a zigzagging of the beats. Not as I like to say, amusingly, but a lot of it amuses my students because my humor doesn't really amuse them always. I have to be aware of that. And I'm very self-conscious of it and very humble. I try to improve. I always say, oh, this is not like macaroni bar lines. I laugh at it myself. It's even worse. I'm ashamed of my presentation. Though I know what I mean when I think of it, because I think the rigidity of the bar lines doesn't correspond to the melodic phrasing of the writing itself. So the intention of the composer is to write a beautiful song that is a long run-on sentence that has expression that goes exponentially expanding horizons of emotion, of daylight, of night, of harmonic progressions that highlight or differently shape the understanding of the melody itself more than words could do. Of course, here it's without lyrics because it's not a song or an aria, but ultimately we hear the music with the phrasings of the structure rather than the notation with the bar lines, which appear so rigid on the score. And when you look at it on the score, it looks like equally sliced salami. And you think, okay, that's very organized. But when you hear it, you feel like this melodic line is sent and it continues to fly forward like some kind of, I don't know. I know I have too many images that come in mind that are not all relevant. Perhaps clouds through the sky that move with the wind a bit faster, a little bit slower, and I'm observing the sky. I don't know what it means, but I just look at it and I'm just marveled by the combination of colors or shapes. And perhaps some of the clouds have a little bit less white, some have more dark. If the sky is gray, the soundscapes, the landscapes, You see, all this is in the personal imagination of everybody. Perhaps the listener expects it or doesn't know what to expect, or if does, then goes into their own individual imagination while listening to the performer. After all, they don't need a performer if they can read the music. It's like reading a book. You don't need a reader, unless you don't know how to read, to tell you the book. But if he or she tells you the book, then all of a sudden you can connect to the book for right or wrong reasons, because it might be more compelling because the way it's said rather than the way it's only written. And when you read it, you might not compare it to this or that, or receive it the way it's comparably said by somebody else. An actor can make you like a role or a character in a storytelling, written, acted, or played, or filmed, or imaginary. But in music, most people don't read a score and silently enjoy it. They have to have somebody play it for them, unless they're musicians themselves. I speak about not the judges, right? I speak about the people who want to receive the storytelling, the narration, and to enjoy and to connect to it. To enjoy is perhaps also a cheap word. I would say to appreciate and to connect. It's all that subtle. I believe in the culture of the group as a combination. So you play for one listener, one microphone. If you record, you play basically for the piece. And through you're playing for the piece, people who hear your recording listen to what you reflect from what the music means to you. When you play it for another human being, would it be 1, 10, 20, 100, with different motivations to hear you, to judge you in the competitions, as I said earlier, or to listen to you just to receive the music that they like to hear or they would like to discover, but they can't on their own, then all of a sudden it becomes a real exchange on the spot. Perhaps it's just evaporated as soon as done, but on the moment it's very meaningful. It's some kind of a non-verbal kinship that happens between what the music says for you, through you, to them who expect, don't know, or discover. It's magically, musically moving, because you feel like not manipulating the audience, nor educating the audience, nor fearing the audience when you're a student or a competitor. Rather, a free narrator of what you love in the piece, and you feel like if the piece is famous, then you're afraid to disappoint people's expectations of their hopes or their opinions of how it's supposed to be told, said, or expressed, explained. But it's so beautiful when it's above that. You play, and what it means to you, you don't know at the point of playing. You can do all these analytical things before you play, while you practice and repeat and write it down and highlight it and hear what the teacher said and record yourself and try this and try that. Is lab or cooking. But then it's tasting, or the blossoming after the harvesting in practice is the moment of performance. It meets its audience. This music of the past is present and shared with the presence of the people. I find that moving, even if it's ephemeral, like the moment that was shared silently in kinship. And the reason I take the time to share these thoughts with you could appear that is because I doubt more than I have convictions. But I think to teach a student is to guide without doubts, in order to bring the student to choose ultimately, perhaps later, once informed, once guided, so that he or she doesn't feel betrayed by either careless teacher, either an over manipulative teacher, or would say opinionated teacher, imposing teacher. You have to a certain extent to impose by conviction or by example. You can say play like me and give examples, not explain. Try to explain analytically or give any opinion about how to understand the written page, how it comes alive to you according to the stylistic facts, the genres facts, the all things that you grew up also before the student to seek for. And if you found it, then you say, I'm going to transmit it to the student. But not all students are there to receive who you are in the piece and play it like you, or think it like you, or dream it like you, or wish to be playing it like you. It doesn't have to be against for the purpose of it. Sometimes conflictual can happen. It doesn't have to be yes men. It doesn't have to be I liked so much what I heard the other day by such and such. I would like to play it like this because it's neat. And in a way, it can be the case, but then how do you integrate it in the performance of yours without it to appear to be edited or sort of artificially fitting in something that it's not part of your playing, but it's part of somebody else's playing. You have to teach the student to build it from the ground up, from the underground up. And then what they present to the audience is the visible part of the iceberg, but you help them build that iceberg under, either because of their intuition that you shape, either if they don't have enough or perhaps they're shy for it, then you try to give them the elements to organize their thoughts about it, and then when they play, to play with the conviction. And if you think that the amount of crescendo, the amount of diminuendo, the amount of everything is too much or not enough, or the colors of this are not enough, the pedaling compared to this, in other words, all the ingredients that enhance the text as a written page to a lively, vibrating, musical, unbelievably unforgettable instant that evaporates as soon as played, unlike a painting or a sculpture that remains solid and factual, even if in the eye of the beholder it can have a different meaning. Here it's, as soon as you finish doing it, you have to redo it from scratch, literally, which is so discouraging, because you could think, I played it so well and now I have to replay it and perhaps I won't play it as well, and then you start getting worried, and that you have to help the student have enough the good fingerings that correspond for their morphology, that gives them that basic sense of confidence. Once they're confident, they'll express themselves. But if they're physically, meaning technically, not confident because the sections are difficult, I mean, the composers don't always write some things that come under our hands, most of the time not easily, not ergonomically. Even if they're great pianists or not, they have some kind of ways to play that is mostly written for themselves if they were pianists. Or think about a string quartet, orchestra, opera, ballet, when they write like Tchaikovsky, Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, compared to Rachmaninoff's Scriabin, Chopin. So you play through their pianism, they're the ones you play through their musicianship, but you translate it, and they translate it themselves. Writing for piano can be a transcription imaginary from an orchestra, because in a way the instrument allows to play way beyond itself in terms of repertoire. From a fugue to a waltz to tango to an aria, from a dance to anything. Of course, make believe with the length of sound, the pedal, or the other artifice. You think you sing, but in fact you only are the exhaling part of the decay of the sound, and then you try to make it prolonged, but the tempo, the articulation, the way you tell the piece more, sing it. When you sing it, you have to combine it most of the time with the elocution of the words, and you have to be sure that then you express it with the meaning rather than only the sounds. Of course, not all listeners follow the lyrics because the vibrato and the high pitch of some voices don't allow to hear it as clearly, even if they try their best to do the enunciation of the words, the syllables combined to words. Regardless, it's part of the piece. In a way, playing the piano is like a mime. You don't have words, but you express the feelings. And a mime doesn't have words, but expresses it with their hands. A ballet dancer expresses all the emotions of the character, all the nuances of the human beings, seeking to this, to that are expressed through the artwork, art form, but only through the gestures. And then you can be also a recitant and say a monologue on stage without to move and express by the meaning of and the tone that you use for the meaning that you over or not enough enhance. Again, interpretation in a monologue in theater opera presentation, spoken. You can also tell the story in a way that you couldn't have read it on your own, even if you can read by yourself a text. But if you can read the music by yourself and somebody plays it for you, it might take another dimension that you didn't even imagine. Let alone if you don't know how to read the music, then you're more the prisoner of the way. This interpretation brings you to say, oh, I love it, or I don't like it, or I don't connect to it, or it's boring, or it's exciting, or it's moving, or it's exhilarating, or it's compelling, or I never imagined I'll get such an emotional feeling out of a piano piece without text, words, orchestra, or drums, or rhythm, or if I like mostly pop or rock. Because not all musicians are classical in their in their not expression but in their education, let less the audience. But then you bring an audience through the piece to what you like in the piece, what means to you in the piece. And I find that so much more enriching than fearing the wrong note, fearing the dislike by a jury member. But the problem is that when you play for multiple jury members, you take the risk anyway to disappoint most. And if you think so, then you don't play at all. Why would you? Because you don't know how to take it, literally. But then if it doesn't mean to you more than the judgments that you receive, regardless of the reactions seeked or told, or the results by the fact of the elimination or the passing to the next round, encouraged or discouraged, then you go back to your teacher, you go back to the piece, and you go back to yourself, the mirror of yourself, the soul of yourself, and you're like, what does it mean to me? Why am I doing this? Why am I hurting myself? Why am I trying to convince people for something that perhaps I'm not very convinced myself? How can I rethink it from scratch? How can I find other sources that will enlighten me into it? So perhaps I can enter in the piece from another point of view, and perhaps I will finally find a way to be holistic within the piece in the approach and the conviction. Well, that's a lot of things to do when you're young. Time seems short because it's intense when you're young. Between meeting the new piece, translating the new piece to yourself and the learning experience, and then delivering it before you go to the next piece because you have to accumulate repertoire. As you age, you replay pieces that you learned earlier, and then all of a sudden you say to yourself, oh, that's what it meant. That's what I was told then. Now I understand better because I needed the patina of time to go through my phrasing, articulation, sound. I still remain vibrantly driven in it, but somehow to the essence rather than to some details, which might bring me away from the essence, or what I consider today the essence, but when I was young, I didn't know about it. I thought it was about the tempo and the articulation, the drive, perhaps even the dynamics, more than the articulation or the pedaling, because I thought it's part of my flow. It's like it's a flow. It's really a flow. It's like a cascade, if you want. Goes through rocks or it goes directly in an abyss, but the water flows and the music flows and you play it and you're in it and you're with it and you're over it, and sometimes you sink in it if it's so difficult that you cannot manage all the things, and you prepare them, you practice them, but they don't come out the day you have to, when it's supposed to, and it's one time through and you panic, or if not, you're worried, and at the end up being so nervous that it might take away from your focused concentration to remain always in connection with the piece and thinking ahead, instead of fearing the situation and feeling uncomfortable there because you feel like you're being judged. Therefore, you're not there to, you cannot freely convince with the pieces that are famous, because you know that everybody in the judges knows how better to play it than you, or rightfully, and you don't know if that rightful will convince them, and you hope that it does, because ultimately it's the filter that helps you to go through, and people will value you because you won this or that competition, which by itself doesn't mean much, but in society it means a lot. And of course that's why people go for them. And as a teacher, I want to arm the student, the candidate, with the maximum conviction that will bring the diverse jury with their opinions and tastes, and perhaps honest dislikes, or sometimes dishonest dislikes. This is to do with their own self. I'm not here to judge how honest or dishonest they are with themselves when they judge. Regardless of the reasons, at some point you reach a consensus and they like you, or the majority that emerged in the algorithm of the calculation of the jury system of calculation or the competition's jury calculation, you manage to go through. So it gives you then a sense of confidence that what you say musically means something that is valuable, so you feel validated. When the teacher tells you, you think you're validated, but not totally, because you need the approval of the peers and through your life in a way. If it's not for a competition, it would be for a job and for an audition, for basically it's an acceptance in the music world. And some people are never accepted. Their ways of doing or playing, hearing, understanding, translating, performing, technically, musically, aesthetically, don't match the tastes of the day, would you say? But you would. And then paradoxically, you read in very specialized magazines dealing with classical music, let's say recording reviews, how they value performances of the 1930s, 20s, when the dictatorship of the wrong note didn't exist, when people played without edits basically in their recordings, and everything was about a concert performance kept on a recording, would it be even on a roll or on a whatever the technology allowed. So you heard a stolen moment, a frozen instant of a given artist's moment, regardless if it's relevant of their artistry in general, or somehow just serendipitously just happened to be that day. And then the wrong knows the strange things that they do are considered artistically inspired. And in a modern day pianist who would play, it would be considered wrong. So they admire the weaknesses of the past, of the context in the past, when they review the old recordings reissued, and then the modern recordings have to be crystal clean and in a way irreproachable on point of view of the objective notes and values. And if they're very personal in their interpretation, then immediately it becomes argumented as temperamental, arrogant, not correct, perhaps occasionally considered great, genius, incredible, or by others the same would be considered intolerable, not translating the essence of the piece, as, of course, according to the people who say it. So it feels like in today's digital world, where one can make a recording, let's say, with a lot of edits, regardless of its initial intent of the phrasing because it's not played in one time, in order to be cleaned from the possible unevenness, not even wrong note, let's say. But it doesn't matter why. It's just the aesthetics of the day call for that. You don't record inspired and not clean today because people will consider that you're weak, technically. And if you're inspired and not clean in 1930, you're considered a genius just because it's outside of context. Nobody is to judge Busoni, Cortot, and put them on a competition or an audition and a job entrance. That doesn't work this way. So it becomes a little bit difficult because then the student feels some kind of double standard. And of course, thankfully, the students don't always listen to too many old recordings to compare, but perhaps some do, and I'm sure they do, more than few, because the availability, access to it today is more easy than ever. In my generation, we couldn't, even if we wished to. But in a click today on a computer, you can enter so many different music worlds, defining the interpretations of great people of the past who we start admiring for aspects of their playing, all the touch, all the rubato, all the tasteful this or tasteless that, according to today or then, and how free they were, and how, in a way, carefree they were. And they didn't worry about text or not text, and they added octaves in the left hand, and they added more notes than they were written on the score, and there wasn't this dictatorship, not only of the wrong note, but of the wrong edition, that less of the wrong text edition among their text editions. It's like the guardians of the temples of the authenticity. I think I'm choking myself in the enumeration of all this grid of righteousness between the text and the sources and the rightfulness and what is right, what is wrong, and not, that's how I like it. Perhaps is all this today, in fact, represents, I think, the reverse side of the same medal. That's a French expression. I don't know how it works in English, but I mean by that because the standard of technical piano playing has risen enormously and exponentially multiplied by many schools in many continents, more than ever before, let less in the 30s, for instance, before World War II, to take an example. And the recording quality and the instrumental quality for recordings has drastically risen. And so more people sound great than they have enough musical narration to say to become compellingly interesting, meaningful, and eventually history-making in their interpretation, compared to, let's say, in the 30s, where perhaps few had the capacity to express a lot, and most of the others were amateurs with a technique that didn't allow them to reach the level of having an expressive opinion about their performance through their technique. It was the amateurs and the few greats. Today is, I think, a plethora, a rainforest of great pianist level playing, but the multiplication of the exponential multiplication of great piano playing technically doesn't mean that proportionally the musical intent, the musical content, the musical vision, the hearing, the translation of the text, the subtleties of the expression, the elegance of a transition that brings a second theme in a way that you feel, oh my God, it's unbelievably beautiful, even if it's only a transition compared to the theme, which obviously is the point of the beauty of the section. But then they can bring you to define the piece through their not only technique but also through their being, the elegance of their being, the stylistic elegance of their playing. And then you think, my God, I don't even have the technique to play like them, even if I am more experienced. But then I would like to bring them, if they are seek from me, that when they study with me, that element that will combine with their gymnastics of playing, also add that element of meaning to it. Not that they have none, it's just most of the time that in order to gather the mechanics of playing, they don't deal with that spiritual aspect of it. Not that it's all separate. Of course it's connected, interconnected. I'm aware of that. Of course. It's not clean or musical, it's and musical. So not only do you have to help the student acquire the technique to express themselves freely in the piece with confidence, but then you have to help them define their tastes in the performance interpretation. And it doesn't have to be yours, as I said earlier, but it has to become theirs, and you have to respect and nurture theirs, hoping that the result of their interpretation at a given day, at a given jury, at a given competition will convince enough people to say, wow, what an amazing combination of colors, atmosphere. Perhaps they don't have to define the ingredients. They actually, most of the time, don't. It's just a general impression. Yes, no, yeah, good. No, not good. It's cruel, but that's how they function. And in a way, that's what the students or the competitors do when they go to the competitions. As I said, they surrender that judgment to their peers or to whoever judges them that day. But in the process, they progress because they understand that they have a deadline that brings them to shape better, sculpt better what they have to express and how they want to say it, how to solidify it so they can be more reliable, which is essential for competitions, because if you are good in one piece or in one round and not in the other, in a sense of having a consistency in your technique and your expression and being cold-blooded about the organization of your literally mnemotechnic playing. I mean, the pedal, the phrasing, the hands, the ratio of the amount of pushing the keys compared to the sound production and the clarity and all these things. I don't speak about the taste and the added rubato or the extra expression on top of the indication of the score, no matter how much that is objective. But the fact is that at that point only, when they acquire more and more through the experience, and I hope through the fingerings that I as a teacher give them, in my case, I only can speak of myself, but I think that's most of the teachers. We want to help the students, the future performers, the actual candidates to be confident through an appropriation of the piece technically and musically that corresponds to the music as close as we think it is, and to their playing that doesn't betray them nor control them, but they have a certain sense that they can control the unexpected of the moment, as I like to say. And then you see that the horizon is endless, because once you enter in this way of living in the piece, like you go in the country that you like, or in a countryside that you like, or you're in an imaginary landscape, or that you feel comfortable in terms of inspired by the harmony, the melody, the rhythm, the articulation, the pedal, the organization, whatever, perhaps the whole thing together in a certain way, more or less this, more or less that in the ingredients. But the point is, you feel like you get deeper and deeper in what you search, seek, and wish to extract from the piece, the essence, the soul of it. And you dialogue imaginarily this way with the performer, with the composer as a performer. perhaps in a way you feel like you're a spokesman or spokeswoman of the composer on the spot while you perform it. Yes, you have a responsibility. You don't want to ruin the piece that you admire of which you don't play it. You know that it's difficult and you want to play it right. Not just wrong right, but also right according to what it means to you. And to build that taste with your teacher and the other experiences through the knowledge and learning of the piece and revisiting the piece, you end up by, at some point, crystallizing what it means to you, and you say, this is how I would like to play it. Or this is how I would have liked to have played it when I met the piece earlier and I was young in it. It's all about time in a way. To be, to have been. To hope and to not regret. To keep not being discouraged regardless of the criticisms and the fair or unfair judgments. To stay true to what you feel the music means to you, because if not, you'll give it up. Besides, if it doesn't mean to you enough, you cannot just constantly please somebody. You're not there for that. In the beginning, for sure, you have to a certain extent. It's part of it. It's like a guidelines. But then after a point, either it becomes meaningful to you and you try to be meaningful through your playing in the piece, and keep on digging on your own, beyond the teacher, beyond the judges, and beyond the time of competitions. Perhaps at some point the piece crystallizes for you what you love in it, what it means to you, and you say, this is what I like to do in it. And you hear it in somebody else's playing, and you might say, wow, this is all what I want to have done. And it could be a young child prodigy or a 16-year-old, and you feel like, in all my decades, I still didn't reach that, even if that's how I would have liked it to be. Sometimes it's jealousy that can manifest in itself. It's human nature. After all, one has to be honest with oneself. Perhaps one does it just in front of the mirror oneself. I don't have to say that in front of everybody if I feel it. But I still don't think so. I think that beyond all that is not jealousy. I think is seeking this, reaching for the unadulterated idealization of what the meaning of this is. Would it be a gospel or theater play, or a film, storytelling, basically. It talks about humanity through art. It talks about us, to us, and even beyond our time frames of life, regardless how technologically and sociologically, therefore, also, we are way far away from the moment of the conception of that text, which comes alive and will always come alive. Why am I speaking so loud, as if I have to convince groups? I'm just talking to you, I'm sorry. I get driven by my passion of teaching, as you obviously noticed. Here I talk to you as a monologue. When I work with the students, it's a dialogue. I hear what they play, I hear what they tell me, how much they tell me. I try to extract as much as they can say about their choices. I try to convince them with my love for the piece, the way I grew to like it, or perhaps discover it, or perhaps rediscover it with them, and perhaps in a certain way totally like it differently because of the way they played, and then find a coherence that corresponds to their playing, and not trying, of course, to clone my way of liking the piece to theirs, regardless if they want to accept it or if they fight me or they accept it. And that's the humility. It keeps us humble. We don't know. We hope. We try. And every time we listen, we hope to hear, and we say, oh, this student hears what they play. This student seeks for colors. This student seeks for this emotion, but this fingering didn't allow, or this shifting wasn't far enough and reached the wrong note that disturbed. And in a way, it doesn't matter by itself. Okay, we can say that, but the students know very well that it matters, because then a wrong note, let's say, pollutes the pristine moment that they're trying to construct when they play this ephemeral construction in front of us. And playing clean should be the ground from which we build the interpretation. Most of the time, playing clean is the omega rather than the alpha of our endeavor. I think because of the fierce competition in quantity and quality compared to the past that is unbelievably more busy. And when the technical level is so high and so close to each other for those who are at the level that is very high, and there are so many more, the choices for those who are heard compared to those who are eliminated in the given competition it's plain painful. You think in all objectivity that you might have passed next to somebody very meaningful who won't be heard because of this elimination compared to another one who will be heard more. Of course, there'll be more competitions, there'll be other opportunities. I don't say this is the end of the world. It sounds very dramatic the way I say it, but I want to say that in absolute terms, life is a long search, and hopefully as long as possible to be able to physically and mentally organize and play the piece to the best of what we want it to be. That's what I try to help the students to be. And if as candidates they can win, I'm very happy for them. If they can't or they don't, because for some reason it didn't happen, I help them not to be discouraged, even if they don't need me to re-encourage them, but to help them understand that it takes a lot of courage to expose yourself emotionally, so to say, through the piece to an audience, let's say of judges, and continue believing in yourself. It sounds very selfish to say that, but in fact it's very selfless, because you bring a lot of humanity and emotional inspiration in the best sense of the word, the real sense of the word, hope in humanity, hope in art, hope in beauty, hope in goodness, hope in the fragility, the vulnerability of beauty over the power of anger or strength per se in life in general, and not in music specifically, but it reflects itself in the way music business is organized as this jungle of competitions with so many people who hurt their psyches to go through this tight funnel. And for the few, or happy few, chosen few, how many are not? And that's where I think I'm here also to help them shape their future repertoires, organize their future goals. If not organize, that's a bit pretentious. I would say encourage. Even if not seeked, you can always hint it. Because it's important. In my generation, the teachers who are born mostly in the 19th century, so end of it, were taught in a pedagogical way that they taught themselves, us, which is never say anything good ever to the student, because that is the end of progress for the student. Ask the impossible, like play a lesson without pedal and play legato on the piano without pedal, and then you'll use it a little bit at the concert, it'll be appearing easier. This kind of drastic ways to more than teach, it's train a student, I think I don't share, even if I received a lot of it. Does it mean that my encouraging teaching is less effective because it's perhaps less drastic in its consistent belittling of the qualities of the performance of the student? No matter what, you'll never be good enough. This week is this, next week is that, and this and that, and how many times did I tell you? And you repeat yourself until you belittle them. And so some psyches of students don't take it. even if it's intended pedagogically to strengthen the student artist to become stronger, because that's how you help them. You don't help them by weakening them by compliments. But I still think that you have to be very careful, if you can evaluate as a teacher, who's a student. Not all students react the same way to what kind of compliments or encouragements. Compliment is a strong word. I would say wrong word even for pedagogy, but I would say encouragement. And of course, every teacher has their way of encouraging, and the students, with time, if they stay a long time with the teacher, they learn how to translate the level of the adjectives between "it was terrible" to "it was not bad," and they take it for "it was great." Yeah. I mean, some teachers grade lower and some teachers for the same grade higher, but ultimately the idea is to help the student extract the best of themselves. And if you encourage them to the point to discourage them by only critical aspects, some will break and some will survive. If it's only the survival of the fittest, I find it a little bit cruel. Perhaps it's my weakness as a person, as a human. But as a pedagogue, I try to find the balance. I don't know how much I reach, but I try to be intuitively attuned to the psyche of the student. Perhaps I misread it. Sometimes I think the piano playing of a student comes out as extremely and absolutely, regardless of the taste again, but of each person's having them, confident. They just deliver it. Wow! And then when you start working on them, with them, on details of the piece that they just played, you notice this and that, and you tell them, in this bar too much pedal, in this bar you made too much ritenuto, careful how you connect this, what does it mean, the dynamics, the colors, the phrasings, the articulation, all these things that I keep saying fast just because there's so many and I could never say them all, but it depends on the section and the point and the person and the touch. Each pianist expresses differently. The slightest nuance is different from the finger, anyway. And all of a sudden I realized that this incredible projection through their playing of confidence, in fact, for some inside is totally lacking off. They're just holding it barely while they play, and then they have no holding conviction compared to what they just did. They do it somehow, elevating themselves like as if they're powered by the piece they play. And when they finish playing it, all of a sudden, somehow, like a parachute, they just deflate their self-esteem about it. So I work on that level, finding the root causes of what I think is right in their playing and encouraging it, and discouraging the weaknesses that I think I try to tell them what not to do, because it goes against what they wanted to organize, not compared to my taste, but to theirs. Would it be a weird fingering that calls for a pedaling that immediately blurs a series of notes? I find out I take it very at heart, as you notice. Each student's individual seeking for what they search to extract from themselves towards the piece they play, and try to respectfully bring them to the maximum of it. Mostly by encouraging, never by discouraging. At least that's my way. Perhaps it functions with some more than with others, obviously. Depends what they come to seek from you. If they seek a trainer, a coach, an advisor, it different levels of transmission of one's experience or one's knowledge or one's life through the piece. After all, most of the famous pieces of the repertoire live with the teachers for longer than with the students, so inevitably they're seasoned by their own experiences in life, and the teacher doesn't have to verbalize it constantly about themselves, because it's not about themselves, the teachers, it's about the students, what they seek from you. And you wonder as a teacher, do I teach this very specific student compared to this other student, not compared, but each student individually, I mean one-to-one. Do I really bring the student what they expect to be learning from me when they seek it by coming to me? I never tire of questioning myself, because I think that one can say as a teacher, well, they have to learn by their own mistakes, they'll have to do them anyway, it's educational, they'll stumble through obstacles and they'll pass over the obstacles their way and they'll find it out. After all, they'll figure it out, they're intelligent enough, and in fact, I cannot shortcut the development of their experience with the piece. Yes, I know that. I'm contradicting myself, devil's advocate to myself. But on the other hand, if I elevate them at a higher step from which to grow that self-search in the piece of themselves within the piece, I think I give them an advantage through my experience. So if not, what's the point of having had my experience? After all, musicianship is really not, and that I know, a contagious disease. I cannot just contagiously transmit them my musicianship, necessarily or not. But teaching is not a contagious disease. It's not cloning either. It's not play like me. You can give the examples, but I think always that they're either exaggerations to make the point or trying to play what the piece meant to you. And in a way, it's the visible part of the iceberg again, this analogy. I think you have to help the student, at least I try, to ground their own structure of this ephemeral moment of performance. I'm very grateful for the students who trust me, for colleagues who send me students who entrust me. I'm very humbled by that, and I find that I give my best for each. I hope I don't pass next to a detail that is important, that could reveal another option, another position of the structure that will hold the structure better. Sometimes the detail is, well, the devil's in the detail anyway, as they say, but sometimes all the details put together don't make a whole either. You have to choose when to give enough details and when to just let them fly, let them play, let them flow, and not harness them too much into all the details that you want them to shape them through your hearing, because you think that's the right way I want to let them know it's supposed to be. I don't know, we speak about good, bad, right, wrong. I do, and I think in a way it's wrong to say that. The concept should be my way or my hearing or my understanding, and what yours is brings this, and I would like to encourage you more towards that, because what you bring to it is beautiful this way. These things happen quickly in one's thought before I even mention a criticism. I don't explain all this as to you today, but I share with you this thought process of mine, because I think it's fundamental honesty about approaching the education beyond training as a nurturing, growing, and respectful I don't know the word. I don't have enough vocabulary to express all my nuanced thoughts about what teaching is supposed to be. Perhaps harvesting, investing, hoping, directing. So it's their responsibility. They appear strong, but in fact they are vulnerable. And we forget that in the flow of events when we work. We speak criticisms without gloves. We sometimes hopefully don't hurt. I try always my best not to hurt because I, first of all, never insult, but that's part of me. And I don't like that way to be anyway because I don't think it's productive. Or to, I don't criticize who they are and what they do, is how they do it. Because I think they can do it much better because it's giving the tools. Well, yeah. Well, the more I try, the least I find words. So I think the best is to remain always open-minded and extremely humble, and let the piece of music that you teach to the student enlighten you for the way you translate it to the student, who needs sometimes less than you think and not as much as you wish to detail the spoon feed, so to say, the interpretation. It's a temptation for the teacher to shape over shape. It's a beautiful, meaningful transmission through the third party, which is the piece, the composer's thought. Such a beautiful triangular exchange. The music, the teacher, the student, and then when the student performs, the interpretation takes its own life with the performer into the audience. Yes. Be yourself. It's the only way to be meaningful. Accept criticisms. Don't try to please. Let time with your humility work on building it. What is yours in the piece. Don't reject, don't imitate. Accept, delay, perhaps acceptance. Delay acceptance is a good way to say. Try to be true to yourself at different times you perform it. Because the truth of it is that it's a gift that keeps on giving, music, isn't it? Especially the pieces that we like to play, we wish to play, we love to hear, and we hope to play as we like them. We try to rise to the task all life long. Thank you.